So, today we're going to be listening to Redacted, and we're going to be talking about the fact that the Epstein flight log client list is still running the world. Nobody, I mean, part of the Maxwell versus US trial, the flight logs were released. The names are there. Uh, Not aware of any substantial and meaningful investigations into any of those people or what exactly the situation was. Many of these people are people that are, big names who have influence in the world, who are in positions of power, and who hold great wealth. Um, and it's all good. It's all good. We're just gonna forget about it. You know, seems like what's gonna happen. How long has it been? Keep holding our breath, I guess.
Well, another day, another round of documents and revelations around Jeffrey Epstein. Now, people who downplayed their relationship with Jeffrey Epstein are continuing to have to answer for it. The Wall Street Journal is out with part two of their sort of bombshell revelations about Jeffrey Epstein. First, it was his calendars. Now, new documents are emerging about Bill Gates and Woody Allen and deeper dives on all of this stuff. And for that, we want to turn to investigative journalist Whitney Webb, who, of course, has written a 2-volume book on the deep state mafia and the Jeffrey Epstein connections and running the sort of government, shadow government that we see, and has been diving into these documents. Whitney joins us. You just wrote a new piece on Noam Chomsky and the questions surrounding why was Noam Chomsky meeting with Jeffrey Epstein and those revelations. But first, like at a high level, Whitney, I just want to get your response to the second Wall Street Journal dumping of documents. And the other day I asked you when you were on earlier this week with the first round of this, why now? Why are we learning about this now? And where did the Wall Street Journal get these documents? We were talking before the show a little bit here. You have some new theories. I'd love to hear them.
Yeah, so the Wall Street Journal, as far as regarding how it got these documents, as far as I've seen, there's been no transparency there, and none of the documents that they've reported on have been released, and it's still not clear how they obtained them or from whom, and or why it's coming out now. So the second part that came out today that you're referring to has a lot of names that are not really that new in relation to the Epstein scandal. People like Larry Summers, Glenn and Ava Dubin, Bill Gates, of course. These are names that have been circulating around Epstein since at least 2019, if not earlier. Now, I've had a little more time to think about why they might be putting this out there now, and I think the answer may be to take heat off of the 4 billionaires who were subpoenaed as part of this U.S. Virgin Island JP Morgan Epstein case, because those are very astounding. So one of the more astounding ones, there's two that really stick out there. One is Sergey Brin, the Google co-founder. And the other one is Michael Orvitz, who used to be head of Walt Disney and a top talent agent for Hollywood. So, so the fact that those two individuals were subpoenaed by the USVI, which is in possession of lots of documents.
And there's a whole other issue. If you listen to celebrities and music artists, we know that music contracts are skewed in a very unequal way. We know that there's casting couch stuff. That's all common knowledge that happened in Hollywood for years. So there's huge power discrepancies between the organizations and the artists, or the organizations and the actors, or, any number of different levels of things can confirm the overall concept that there's corruption and human abuse occurring of anyone all the way from underage to 40 years old probably. Although 40 is getting a little old, they lose interest after like maybe 25, it seems.
About Epstein's activities in JP Morgan and how they relate to his sex trafficking activities. The fact that they subpoenaed 4 billionaires, the other two are Thomas Pritzker of Hyatt Hotels, whose family has long-standing intelligence and organized crime connections that I detail in my book. And then the other one is Mort Zuckerman, who bought the New York Daily News after Robert Maxwell's death, Maxwell having been the previous owner, and Zuckerman was known to frequent Epstein's townhouse. A lot of that isn't necessarily that revelatory on that end, but having the Google co-founder be that close to Epstein and having a former Walt Disney president being that close to Epstein are pretty significant. And as far as the Disney ties go, when Orvitz was head of Disney, the head of the Imagineering department at Disney was a guy named Brand Farron. And while Farron was in that role at Disney, he was advising the US military, intelligence, all sorts of shady actors. And he brought to the Imagineering department close associates of Epstein like Marvin Minsky and Danny Hillis, who were very closely involved with the development of military supercomputers, creating artificial intelligence, all sorts of very odd things. And the fact that they'd be involved in a company like Disney, which of course targets mainly children. And of course, Minsky was named, for example, as being a key part of the sex trafficking operations by people like Virginia Giuffre, for example. This is pretty astounding. So the fact that we're having these names come out with the Wall Street Journal piece, people are now instead talking about Noam Chomsky, talking about Bill Gates, and not talking about these people who have been subpoenaed in a legal case about Epstein's sex trafficking network. No one's talking about them. Instead, it's talking about these meetings on their calendars, right? And so, like someone like Chomsky, who, as far as the Wall Street Journal reported, had 3 meetings with him, that I don't see that as being as significant, for example, as these 4 billionaires who have been subpoenaed, but that's getting no coverage. So I would suspect it's to take heat off of some of these guys, if you ask me. But then again, there are some important revelations here, and I think the bulk of those revelations, at least ones that are new, were in the first installment of this recent round of Wall Street Journal reporting. But in the second piece, I do think it's pretty interesting that they keep bringing up the fact that Epstein was describing himself as being a money manager for Bill Gates. I think that definitely needs to be pursued. And I think one of the reasons that mainstream media even will not do that isn't just because of how extensively Gates funds a lot of mainstream media outlets. But is also related to the fact that if you look at Epstein's history, he's tied to a series of Microsoft top executives who flew on his plane in the 1990s and who connected him with MIT Media Lab, for example, and all sorts of other activities. Were very much involved with his what he was doing, and apparently his sex trafficking activities. Actually, Nathan Myhrvold, the chief technology officer of Microsoft who flew on Epstein's plane in the late 90s, was named by Alan Dershowitz actually as a person that abused.
It's amazing what you can get away with if you have the media on your side, and you can easily get the media on your side by spending enough money and having the right connections to the right people. So it's like the hope that this is ever going to, I mean, you've had multiple instances of true information coming out and people being removed from Twitter or removed from social media platforms, legitimate news organizations with sources and verified information being basically told that their information is false by the machine. If it's only one voice out of many, they just shut you down. They either use the internet platforms to remove you, because that's how most people access information now. Even if you're a newspaper, you're using an intermediary like Twitter or YouTube to get your voice and your subject matter out to most people. And the amount of control and pushback that you see, by coordinated pushback and control that you see, is absolutely mind-blowing, to me at least.
Used minors that Epstein trafficked. That's astounding.
And Alan Dershowitz,
Yeah,
who won't
because
even answer questions about it when confronted and asked questions about it.
yeah. So
you
he
know,
says, "Oh, you shouldn't. I didn't do anything with Virginia Roberts." Dershowitz in this line in this particular interview he gave, he said, "Oh, I wasn't doing that," and then refers instead to like maybe you should look at Nathan Myhrvold, who Virginia
wow.
Roberts had also named, right? So that's very extreme, and there's been no interest in pursuing him, right? And he was, chief technology officer of Microsoft, very, very close to Bill Gates, obviously, and another top Microsoft executive Linda Stone hired a woman from Epstein's entourage as her secretary, and is the person that connected him to the MIT Media Lab, which, if you believe a lot of what's in these Wall Street Journal revelations, was a key reason for a lot of these people, including Chomsky, meeting with Epstein related to his activities in and around MIT. So,
I want to go back to
again, I
the
think there's. Mhm.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I just want to
Sorry.
go, circle back on the Bill Gates piece of this. It is interesting to your
Sure.
point that the four billionaires who are involved in this lawsuit, in an effort to take the heat off of them. And I think you're absolutely right about that. That makes a lot of sense. But Bill Gates, his name keeps getting brought up and up and up. And I'm stunned by that. So I want to kind of go back to that point that they make in this piece. Gates has repeatedly said that he'd just like to have dinner with Epstein, 36 times? And then these new reports show that he vetted legal counsel, that Epstein vetted legal counsel for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and that he told people that he was, quote, managing money for Mr. Gates, which is really interesting. That seems to me a new revelation. Although spokespeople for Bill Gates continue to insist that Epstein totally misrepresented his relationship when talking to other people. So what do you make of these Bill Gates revelations?
Yeah, so again, the mainstream media narrative refuses to say that the Epstein Gates relationship precedes 2011, which again, I think is all about protecting greater scrutiny of the Epstein Microsoft ties and also the Maxwell family ties to Microsoft that took place around in the 1990s when that sort of team up took place. But the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has a lot to answer for when it comes to Epstein, including before 2011. One of the top science advisors.
Well, isn't it crazy that when the details of what was really going on came out, Bill Gates' wife left him almost immediately. That was it. So that kind of on the face of it, just, speculating. I don't know shit. Obviously, neither does nobody else. It's all fucking secret and nobody's. But circumstantially, that seems to indicate that Melinda was no longer viewing. I don't know what else was really happening at the time. Maybe it was just coincidental. Maybe it had nothing to do with it whatsoever. But if there was this level of involvement and she was not fully read into what this actually was, what was it? What was the reason for all these meetings and interactions? It's she very quickly exited her marriage around the time when this information became publicly available. So take that for what you want. I'm not someone that is going to be doing the whole propaganda thing of like, here's a thing that happened and this is what you should believe. I think that the idea of returning to a time when you got news without also then being told what to think right afterwards would be a huge benefit to the success and prosperity of America if we could just get information that wasn't so biased and had an agenda. I think, across the board, that would be beneficial.
For that foundation was a woman named Melanie Walker that Epstein recruited into his network in 1992, and she was his science advisor after he apparently paid for some of her graduate studies. And that was in the late 90s. And shortly thereafter, she has a brief stint with the World Health Organization and then is hired to be a science advisor to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where she introduces Epstein to another science advisor of the Gates Foundation, Boris Nikolic. And if you remember, Boris Nikolic, when Epstein died, was actually the backup executor to Epstein's will. So why would Epstein have put Nikolic in that position? And these are all ties that predate Epstein and Gates' alleged.
And lo and behold, when I do a little search, she voiced concerns about her husband's relationship with Epstein and a harassment claim against his money manager. He also had an affair with an employee. Wasn't satisfied with handling of a previously undisclosed sex claim. Reputation for questionable conduct in work-related settings. He pursued women that worked for him. I mean, he's not a saint, he's just a regular person. So if you know people that have done, questionable things, like a lot of human beings out there are pretty sus. And so when you add to the mix meetings with Epstein, I mean, it would seem like it would make sense to pay attention to that and to say, hey, what's actually going on here? And then the bullshit superficial explanations where it's just like, oh, I just wanted dinner. Like how many other people could you go have dinner with? And you keep going back to this guy, and the only thing he's got going on is like a sex ring. So I don't know. Uh, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. Um, oh man, so frustrating. I feel like it's just
First meeting
we're
per
not gonna get it.
mainstream media in 2011. And then there's the added fact that UK mainstream media in the year 2000 said that Epstein made his money because of his business links to Donald Trump, Leslie Wexner, and Bill Gates. So how would they be able to say that Epstein made his millions by through business ties with Bill Gates if they didn't meet for 10 years after the fact? It doesn't make any sense. And why would Gates hire someone like Melanie Walker, whose resume at that point was being science advisor for Jeffrey Epstein? You would have to know who Epstein was and what kind of science he was into. And of course, there's a lot of overlap between the science that Epstein was into and the science that Bill Gates is into.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. There's a few other names in this second report that I wanted to ask you about. Reid Hoffman, billionaire venture capitalist, LinkedIn co-founder, apparently visited Epstein's private island, and then it also stayed over in his Manhattan townhouse. Woody Allen, as you mentioned, attended dozens of dinners with his wife at Epstein's mansion and invited Epstein to his film screenings. Ehud Barak, the former Israeli prime minister, visited Epstein dozens of times and was on his private jet on a regular basis. And then Leon Black, the billionaire co-founder of private equity giant Apollo Global Management, more than 100 meetings with Epstein from 2013 to 2017. What do you make of those names?
Oh, there's a lot to say about all of those names because these are just adding to the already known revelations about these people's ties with Epstein. So, in the case of Leon Black, that was actually investigated by his investment or hedge fund, Apollo Global Management, which he has since resigned from. But the person that investigated his ties was a guy named Buzzy Krongard, who's an ex CIA guy that was tied to insider trading on 9/11. So, I mean, it's seems like that was probably a big cover up, to say the very least. And Leon Black had entrusted almost as much of his money to Epstein as someone like Leslie Wexner had, to a slightly lesser extent, was managing a lot of his estate, was managing his tax planning, which again, Epstein's role in tax planning for elites goes back to his time at Bear Stearns in the late 70s and early 80s when he was, already engaged in financial criminality and apparently helping billionaires, engage in mass tax evasion. So, that obviously raises some question marks there. And Leon Black, along with Glenn Dubin, were added to the board of this school at Harvard that Leslie Wexner essentially created through his financing that David Gergen runs. At the Harvard Kennedy School, the Center for Public Leadership, which is openly allied with the World Economic Forum's Young Global Leaders program, and a bunch of these Epstein cronies and Wexner cronies, I guess
Speaking of which, Vivek was on that list. He claims that he didn't want it. He claims that, but he did sue and get rid of it, and now his wiki page is locked. So I don't think he's got any direct ties, but it's just mentioning World Economic Forum global leaders. Like, this is a cabal of leaders that get deployed, and they're basically trained and indoctrinated at the same place. And then that could explain why we get such similar agendas in so many first world NATO allied countries, because all the leaders of these countries come from this global leaders pool.
extension got added to the board. So you have like Dubin and Black, and of course Epstein and Larry Summers. A lot of people that pop up in the second part of this Wall Street Journal revelation all swimming around Harvard, and then you have the MIT connections popping up in both of these recent revelations as well, so that's worth considering. And as far as Ehud Barak goes, the Wall Street Journal declined to note that the Daily Beast, which is considered mainstream media, reported that Barak was seen so frequently at the apartments where trafficked girls were housed, which is owned by OSA Properties, which involves a bunch of former Jeffrey Epstein employees and is run by his brother Mark Epstein. Barak spent the night there. All sorts of dubious connections between Barak and the sex trafficking scandal that did not make it into the Wall Street Journal report,
Right.
and or add some important context, I think is pretty clear. And of course, when it comes to Woody Allen, I'm sure most people are probably familiar with his past scandals, including the fact that his ex partner, actress Mia Farrow, he is alleged, and it's been extensively corroborated by witnesses and other sources, that he sexually molested her adopted daughter, Dylan Farrow, at least when she was 7 years old, but according to court documents, took a sexual interest in her when she was between the ages of 2 and 3. And his current wife is actually another one of Mia Farrow's adopted children that Woody Allen met when she was a child, though his current wife, Soon-Yi Previn, maintains they didn't have their first quote-unquote friendly interaction until she was a teenager, and Woody Allen's relationship with Mia Farrow ended when she found nude photographs of Soon-Yi Previn in his house when she was, I believe, 18 or 19 years old. So Woody Allen and Jeffrey Epstein certainly seem to have had a lot in common, and that may explain why they socialized so frequently. Because obviously, if you're familiar with the relationship between Soon-Yi Previn and Woody Allen, a lot of people probably didn't really want to be around that to an extent that we're actually against that type of activity. But certainly Epstein would not have been bothered by that, to say the very least. So I think that sort of explains.
That's his sick jam. Sadly enough, that was sadly what he was into. Unbelievable. So, I'll get you out of here on this final question, which is, in this latest round of documents, or this latest latest story from the Wall Street Journal, are there still gaping holes that you would love for them to answer to fill in? Are there's things that in your reporting that you would love for them to answer for here?
Yeah, I would say release the documents. No one can verify what these documents are and what they say and what the Wall Street Journal is leaving out. Keep in mind, the Wall Street Journal, as far as I'm aware, is owned by News Corp, which is Rupert Murdoch, which recently fired Tucker Carlson for saying too much, right? So,
right.
it's
Especially about
fair
Epstein.
to say that,
specifically.
right. Yeah. So it's fair to say that there's probably names here that they're keeping out of the limelight for whatever reason, because keep in mind, people like Rupert Murdoch have been involved in these quote unquote deep state networks for much of his media career. And he also had a very prominent feud and rivalry with Robert Maxwell about building parallel media empires. So, I wouldn't necessarily trust this guy or, a mainstream media outlet like the Wall Street Journal. And I really think the best way forward is transparency with these documents, because according to the journal itself in these reports, they call it a trove of documents, thousands of pages, not just of his calendar and his meetings and his schedules, but emails. Release the emails.
Yeah.
And this is something that's come up time and again with reporting. Why can't you just release the emails or the source documents or any of the stuff? And it very rarely happens. And frankly, I think it's definitely time for greater visibility into not just the documents themselves, but who gave them to the Wall Street Journal. There's a lot of unanswered questions here that, again, a lot of people don't seem interested in asking. And I go back to what I said earlier. I think, why can't they mention any of these big tech especially with the Reid Hoffman revelations, right, of LinkedIn. Hoffman had been known to have taken Epstein to a big Silicon Valley meetup that involved people, some of the biggest names in Silicon Valley. Epstein allegedly knew people like Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, the biggest names in tech. You, of course, have Bill Gates and Microsoft, and now Sergey Brin has been subpoenaed, and they don't note any of these Silicon Valley connections in their reporting beyond just, Reid Hoffman had more meetings with Epstein than he was open about. It's a bit odd. And even with the Chomsky revelations, actually Epstein had openly said that he had invited Chomsky to his home in an interview he gave to a Science magazine journalist in 2017. And he said the reason he invited Chomsky to his home was to explicitly discuss artificial intelligence. That didn't make it into the Wall Street Journal report. So either they're not doing their homework, or they're trying to give a very limited scope of what these revelations contain. And again, they'll say what the documents contain and then quickly give the statements of these people distancing themselves from Epstein. But again, as my work has shown and the work of others has shown, there's a much deeper story here.
For sure. And Whitney Webb has a new article out on her website, unlimitedhangout.com, unraveling the Epstein-Chomsky relationship. So I encourage you all to go and read that. We will have that linked up in the description below as well. It's always great to catch up with you. Whitney Webb, investigative journalist, thank you so much for your insight and analysis on this.
So there are some document links hosted on Document Cloud. You've got the Epstein emails document dump. Not sure. I'm not seeing it. I'm not sure if there is an upload date on these. I mean, obviously the emails are dated. And then also, the flight logs have been released in USA vs. Maxwell. And I will link both of these document dumps as part of this video. If you try to do searches and read news articles, nobody's linking you to the source information. They're all giving you a hot take. So if you really want to see some source documents associated with this case, you want to go through the flight logs, page 1, and we're going all the way to 118 pages of flight logs. Alan Dershowitz, you've got a lot to sort through. But if you want to look at it, there is some real information, and as you can see, some of it's been redacted. But the promises that we were made about the Maxwell trial, nothing's coming to fruition. We haven't heard anything. We're going to get nothing. We get promises, just like with everything else, with presidents, with politicians, with companies. You get promises, and then later on you find out they're empty promises, and you're just expected to move on and then continue to believe. The next set of promises, oh well, this time we really promise, and it's just a sad state of affairs that seems to be seems to be all we're going to get. So keep talking about this, keep highlighting it, keep it, just don't let it go away. That's what they want. They want to just dump more and more stuff in your lap, and eventually get overwhelmed, and this gets pushed to the back and everybody forgets about it. That's what they're counting on. Don't let it happen, guys. Take care, and I'll talk to you again soon.